Inmates holed up on the roof of Hawke's Bay Prison finally surrender. Corrections joins us live. The government's pushing through a law that could see violent criminals banned from being anywhere near guns for a decade, but will it actually work? Had you heard of Andrew Jeffcoat or Colville before today? A gold medal's put them both on the map. The health worker recruitment drive falls flat with some local nurses. The Prime Minister announces $30 million for Samoa. About half of it is to battle climate change. And the treasure that accidentally went out with the trash. More than $200 million in cryptocurrency lost at the local tip. Check us out live, Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Corrections Minister says he wants to ensure another prison roof escape like today's in Hawke's Bay doesn't happen again. The last of the 6 young inmates left the roof about 1:15 this afternoon after they made their way up there almost 24 hours earlier. The Department of Corrections says it seems the 17 to 19-year-olds weren't happy because they couldn't use the youth unit's sports area. Kelvin Davis was asked if it's good enough that they could get onto the roof of a prison.
These people are in prison for a reason. Their behaviour hasn't been the best to get them there, and I guess it's just an ongoing the way they behave. It's unfortunate, but again, we've got the result. They've come down. Nobody's been injured.
Kelvin Davis says a review will be carried out into the escape. The minister responsible for New Zealand's spy agencies says the United States and China both have the right to act as sovereign countries as tensions over Taiwan ratchet up further. There are reports today the US House of Representatives Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is set to arrive in Taiwan, the self-ruled island claimed by China. She's in Asia, leading a congressional delegation to Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea and Japan. But there's been intense speculation about Taiwan. Andrew Little was asked at Parliament about the implications for regional security.
I think sovereign countries have to be able to make their judgments, including their diplomatic judgments, for whether it's China, Taiwan or whoever that the US wants to interact with. That's entirely a matter for the US. Equally, China is entitled to express their view, and they clearly have. But I think when push comes to shove, China openly states that they respect the right of sovereign nations to make their appropriate judgments.
Beijing has already warned of a forceful response if the visit goes ahead. Health officials won't say how much is being spent on boosting nurse recruitment through Shortland Street and TVNZ. The Health Minister announced the partnership yesterday, but was unsure of the finer details or any related funding. A spokesperson for National Health Organisation Te Whatu Ora has now confirmed it has a contract with the show and TVNZ Black Sand, an advertising and sponsorships arm. The deal, which was also signed off by the Ministry of Health, includes an interactive quiz, social media content, promotional videos and a brief storyline on the show. Te Whatu Ora says funding amounts are commercially sensitive and all appropriate practices were followed. Midwives appear to be split over whether their unvaccinated colleagues should be allowed to return to work. The College of Midwives is calling for the government to reconsider the evidence it's using to prevent unvaccinated midwives from working amid major pressure on the sector. RNZ has spoken to 4 midwives from 4 different regions. Annalise says 7 of the 12 community midwives in her region left their jobs because they choose not to be vaccinated, and she wants them to be able to come back.
The risk of having no midwife is greater than the risk of having an unvaccinated midwife, and that's the reality that we're facing in our region.
Another midwife in Northland says she's on the fence because midwives work with vulnerable people. The college doesn't know how many midwives left their jobs over the vaccine mandate. The Prime Minister is heading home from Samoa after celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Friendship and offering a cash injection to help the Pacific nation reopen after COVID. New Zealand's pledged $12 million to help rebuild the historic Savalolo market, as well as $15 million to support Samoa's climate change policies. Speaking in Apia, Jacinda Ardern said Samoa will choose how to spend that funding.
We want to work alongside the Pacific with their priorities. They're best placed to identify what are the most pressing issues. For Samoa, they've already said that renewable energy is one, but also flood protections.
Jacinda Ardern met with Samoa's head of state and Prime Minister Fiame Naomi Mataafa this morning before flying back to New Zealand. Just over 1.3 million people have received the first cost of living payment, more than 800,000 fewer than expected. When announcing the $350 payment, the government said it would go to 2.1 million New Zealand tax residents who earn up to $70,000. Advice to ministers in May shows that is a highly uncertain estimate based on 2019-2020 tax year data adjusted for population growth. But Revenue Minister David Parker says 2.1 million people will receive the payment.
People don't become eligible until they've filed their tax return and provided other information to Inland Revenue. So don't take the bait on people who say that the 1.3 million is the total. It's not, and it was never going to be.
Inland Revenue says it still doesn't have bank account information for more than 130,000 people. And a third case of monkeypox has been confirmed in New Zealand. The infected person had recently arrived from overseas and is currently isolating in the South Island. To sport, and New Zealand swimmer Andrew Jeffcoat bounced back from the brink of depression to win gold in the 50 metres backstroke at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. After missing out on Olympic selection last year, the death of his long-time coach a couple of years ago, and then narrowly missing out on a medal in the 100 metre backstroke, he admits times have been tough.
It's awesome to be able to get up after the 100. The other day I was pretty disappointed to only get fourth. So to be here and be able to step up, I'm very proud of myself, but also the team. We've got a great team here, awesome team environment, and everybody's stepping up, everyone's PBing, and we've won a lot more medals than I think anyone has expected to.
Jeffcoat's gold was New Zealand's fifth in the pool. Despite having left the country, All Blacks lock Sam Whitelock says the side still feels under enormous pressure as they prepare for this weekend's test against the Springboks in South Africa. The team and coaching staff faced a grilling in New Zealand in the wake of their first ever series loss to Ireland, ultimately leading to the sacking of two of Ian Foster's assistant coaches.
The pressure cooker's still on for us as players, for us as a team. We're always trying to put pressure on ourselves, but it is good for us at the moment. It's great for the team to be over here together. We've got time to work on what we need to work on to improve, and that's what we're trying to do, is improve a number of areas of our game.
The first test is on Sunday morning, and two-time Formula One world champion Fernando Alonso has signed with Aston Martin for next year. That's the news.
Trying to bring prisoners down.
But it's very cold out here this morning, so I can just imagine how cold those prisoners on the roof must be.
Trying to get nurses in.
It is another strategy and it might work, but I would caution anybody who thinks that shorts in the street actually reflects the truth.
And bringing medals home.
The golds do keep coming here, and they want to keep it going as well. Like, there are more medal prospects coming in the next couple of days, so I'm sure that we will hear more from the pool as well.
Showtime, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northwest gales are affecting many southern and eastern areas of the South Island, also Wairarapa and Wellington until tomorrow morning. From Northland to Bay of Plenty, mainly fine. Isolated showers more widespread about eastern Bay of Plenty tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. Chance of a shower tomorrow afternoon or evening. From Waikato to Wellington and for Wairarapa, including the central high country. Mostly cloudy with a few showers, turning to rain for a time tomorrow and then clearing from the south. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, a few showers but rain for a time in Nelson early tomorrow, then becoming fine everywhere. Otago and Southland, a few showers clearing later tomorrow. For Stewart Island, also Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Periods of rain with possible thunderstorms, easing to showers tomorrow morning, then clearing from Bulla and Westland. And for the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, a few showers tomorrow. The time is 8 minutes past 5. I'll update you with the latest news headlines and possibly some traffic news at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. 6 teenage prisoners have ended their 24-hour protest on the roof of Hawke's Bay Regional Prison. They made their way up there yesterday afternoon. 1 came down overnight and 5 remained in freezing temperatures. Another prisoner retreated about lunchtime, followed by the 4 others. They've been yelling out to media, throwing things off the roof, while corrections had to call on staff from around the region to help them. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Concussion has the story.
Shouting, yelling, swearing, and then silence. 6 prisoners spent a cold, frosty winter's night on the roof after they trashed the prison's youth unit, throwing projectiles, pieces of wood and egging on the media, listening to broadcasts of reporters talking about them as they went to air. Industrial Officer for the Corrections Association, Alan Whitley, says it wouldn't have been difficult to climb on top of the building.
Oh, it's not hard to get on the roof of a unit. They're not that high off the ground. So they can easily, and these are youth, they're quite fit and energetic, so they can bounce each other up onto the roof.
And they stood on that roof for nearly 24 hours. There from yesterday at 2:30 in the afternoon till about 1:15 today. Some were only in singlets on top as the cold set in, as a white frost settled on the ground below them. They could be heard yelling things like, "It's because they didn't let us outside, we're happy," and play us on the radio. Corrections says early indications suggest the prisoners were upset because they couldn't go into the unit's sport area yesterday. But after much shouting and playing some loud music, they left the top of the building. They jumped off the roof, about 3 metres, were restrained on the ground and led away in a van. Corrections Minister Calvin Davis was asked if it's good enough that these boys can get onto the roof of a prison.
These people are in prison for a reason. Their behaviour hasn't been the best to get them there, and I guess it's just an ongoing the way they behave. It's unfortunate, but again, we've got the result. They've come down. Nobody's been injured.
He gave his thanks to the prison staff.
I just want to acknowledge the work of the corrections officers, that they're highly professional, well trained, and brought this to a safe conclusion.
Just Speak is a youth law advocacy group. Its executive director, Epiphany Ford Taua, says their behaviour is a reflection on the prison system.
It's a call for help from young people who are evidently feeling distressed and feeling unheard.
She's scared about what consequences these youth might face. She has this message for corrections.
Listen to what these young people have to say, how they're feeling, what their needs are, and do their best to support them. These are young people. These are our future.
A full review of the incident will be carried out by corrections and the matter will be referred to police.
And Corrections Chief Custodial Officer, Neil Beals joins us now. Kia ora, Neil. How did you manage to get them down from the roof?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, first of all, I think the congratulations needs to go to the actual staff who worked through the night to get them down. And we used our prison negotiation teams, who are trained to do things like this. This is why we have teams trained in order for events like this. They've done an exceptional job under the guidance of the prison manager and the prison director and his team, who have worked through the night. It's an exceptional piece of work, and I'm just glad that everyone's able to go home safe and sound at the end of the day.
Do you reckon Mother Nature worked in your favour? It was pretty cold.
Oh, well, look, I wouldn't have wanted to have been up there on my own all night. It's certainly a factor, but these are young men. They can get quite carried away when they do certain things. Also, when you've got more than one person involved, and they can egg each other on, and there's a little bit of testosterone involved. But look, whatever the reason for them going up onto that roof, regardless of whether they were able or not to get into a sports area, that's no way of dealing with an issue. We have a complaints process, we have a system for them to raise concerns, but we will carry out a proper review as we do in these instances. We'll lift the lid on this and check what's happened, and of course, whatever learnings we can take from this, we'll factor into the rest of the estate.
Neil, talk to us a bit more about that. You mentioned the sports area, so this is about what got them G'd up and sent them up onto the roof. What were they complaining about exactly?
So my understanding so far, with the information I've got, is that they'd been told that they could access the sports area earlier on in that day. Something had occurred throughout that day where the units weren't kept in a clean and tidy state, or something had gone wrong that delayed them from going in or stopped them from going in, and they reacted to that in the way that they did. So, that's going to form quite a large part of the review. I don't want to necessarily jump to any conclusions right now or draw a definitive line over what we believe may happen. We need to speak to the people involved. We need to speak to the young men involved as well.
Understand that, but is it your impression at this point that the access to the sports area was withdrawn because, as a punishment for not keeping up standards?
All I know is that, from what I understand, is that they couldn't access the area, and they may have been promised that in the morning. Something had gone wrong throughout that day. Either they either hadn't achieved what they were supposed to achieve, or completed what they were supposed to have completed. I don't know the exact details of that right now, but I need this will be part of the review. But again, as I say, there are ways to resolve these incidents, and there are ways to resolve these issues and complaints without resorting to climbing on a roof. So I need to understand.
It's not a staffing issue, Neil, in terms of, I understand obviously you have ratios with prisoners and unlock times, etc., that can be affected if you have staff shortages. There is no suggestion that a staff shortage meant they couldn't have access to the sports area.
No, I've not been.
And it's not an ongoing problem as far as you understand, it's just been on this one day?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, this isn't a staffing issue. We wouldn't unlock prisoners if we had the wrong amount of staff. If we didn't have the right ratios, then we just don't unlock. These guys were unlocked, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't have got out. So I need really to take the time to get the review team together, go in there and do the interviews, look at whatever footage I've got on CCTV or body-worn cameras, and find out for ourselves.
Yeah. How did they get up there, Neil? I mean, and did nobody spot them sort of scaling the side of the building?
Well, look, in my experience, these things happen exceptionally quickly, and I heard our CANS representatives explaining how quickly these can happen, particularly young, fit men. They
had a few things with them, though. Wasn't that a bean chair on top of the building?
I understand that there were some blankets and things may have been passed up to them from others. Again, I'll have to watch the CCTV to really fully establish exactly what has gone on. I know that for a while they were talking to other boys who were in the units below them, so things may have been passed to them as a result of this. When we have an incident like this, one of the first things that we have to do is obviously cordon and contain. We don't want it to go any further. The unit that this happened in is in a separate area from the rest of the mainstream prison, so it's like a secure unit within the grounds of the prison, so it's got its own little fence line around it as well.
I understand that, but I saw them eating out of containers, so did they take food supplies up onto the roof, or did you provide them with food?
No, we wouldn't have provided them with food.
Right.
To my knowledge, anyway. Again, I need to go through the logbooks of the incident. I've not been in the Hawke's Bay region. I'm in the Auckland region today. But all of this will form part of the review. We'll form. We will have a very, very clear chronology of events. What happened and when. Who did what at what point. All of these are the normal things that we do during these kind of operational reviews. And by the time that we do that, we will have a very, very clearly established pattern of events. What we can learn from that, and how can we avoid these things happening in the future. They don't happen all that often, I'm happy to say, but we do, we work in a prison system where incidents do happen, which is why we train staff in incident management and emergency response, and those are the measures that we put in place last night.
Appreciate your time, Neil. That's Neil Beals, who's the Corrections Chief Custodial Officer there. It is almost 17 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The golden glow shows no signs of fading for New Zealand at the Commonwealth Games. Led yet again by our high-flying track cyclists, the team added 3 more gold medals on day 4. There was also more success for the New Zealand swimmers, who picked up a 5th Commonwealth crown of these games in the pool. Clay Wilson reports.
Gates cruises over the line to take gold. New Zealand were all over that. They take first and second place.
A fitting finish to a dominant 4 days at the Velodrome. Aaron Gate and Campbell Stewart's 1-2 in the men's points race, rounding things out for New Zealand's track cyclists at the Commonwealth Games. Gate telling Sky Sport his 3rd gold in Birmingham meant the most.
That one was pretty special, and it's a good chance to refresh my singing of the national anthem too. It's been pretty special. It's something I've not got to do many times in my life, so it's something that I'll definitely always cherish, and to have good friend Campbell standing next to me again today too is just absolutely awesome. Equally
awesome, teammate Elise Andrews, who followed Michaela Drummond's silver in the scratch race by taking out the women's Kieran. The 22-year-old joining Gate as just the 4th and 5th New Zealanders to win 3 golds at a single Commonwealth Games.
Capel on the wheel of the New Zealander. Mitchell, has she got the kick to go again? They sprint for the line. Capel throws the bike, but Elise Andrews holds on to take another gold medal for New Zealand.
After announcing herself with silver in the same event at last year's Olympics, Andrews explaining to Sky Sport that even she had surprised herself at her 2nd Commonwealth Games.
I'm so overwhelmed. I came here obviously wanting to do my absolute best and leave everything out on the track, but I never could have imagine that this would be the final outcome.
And the New Zealand team wasn't done there. Swimmer Andrew Govt capping off another dream day by breaking a national record to grab gold in the men's 50-metre backstroke.
Oh, something you dream of, eh? You wake up every day for moments like that. There's not a lot that I can say really. You can't really put it into words. It's a special feeling. Probably the best feeling I've ever had.
Govt's gold took New Zealand's swim squad to 5 golds and 8 total medals, the second best return in the pool so far, behind only Australia. Those positions were reversed at the velodrome though, our riders finishing as the top nation in the track cycling, ahead of the Aussies. 13 medals in all, including 8 gold. A story at the opposite end of the spectrum to the recent athlete welfare issues which have put New Zealand cycling in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Speaking about the performance of the men's endurance riders, Gate indicated to Sky that their Birmingham Blitz was just the start of better times to come.
The way we race and the results we've had this week, I think, speak for themselves in terms of our relationship as a squad, and I think it's only going to continue to improve as we go forward because success breeds success. And
success at these games also comes with soft toys, to the delight of Gate's young son Axel.
For Mr. Moose, or whatever he's been calling them, he's been loving those soft toys. It's definitely a nice little bonus here. It's his birthday next week, actually, his 3rd birthday, so it means I don't have to buy him anything, which is pretty cool. I tell a lie, he's put his request in months ago for a red bike, so that's something I'm not going to complain about. I'm happy to buy him one of those.
New Zealand's 24 medals and 13 gold has them 3rd overall, behind Australia and England. But it isn't all happy headlines for our Trans-Tasman friends. The supposed love triangle between 2 gold medal winning Australian swimmers and a former pop star once romantically linked to American rocker Miley Cyrus becoming the non-sporting story of the Games so far.
And the cycling audio in that story was courtesy of Sky Sport. It is 21 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Homai o Whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Are you staying up to watch the Commonwealth Games? Let us know what's been your favourite so far. Text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The Corrections Minister says he wants to ensure another prison roof escape like today's in Hawke's Bay doesn't happen again. The last of the prisoners left the roof about 1:15 this afternoon after spending a freezing night up there. The minister responsible for New Zealand's spy agencies says the US and China both have the right to act as sovereign countries as tensions over Taiwan increase. This follows reports that the US House of Representatives Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is set to arrive in Taiwan, despite Beijing warning of a forceful response if the visit goes ahead. The College of Midwives is calling for the government to reconsider the evidence it's using to prevent unvaccinated midwives from working amid major pressure on the sector, but midwives themselves appear to be split over the issue. A geothermal sinkhole in Rotorua has been filled in and steam vents installed after a woman fell into it and suffered serious burns last week. WorkSafe says it could take up to 12 months to investigate the accident. A 3rd case of monkeypox has been confirmed in New Zealand this afternoon. The infected person had recently arrived from overseas and is currently isolating in the South Island. And the United States President says a US drone strike, which killed an al-Qaeda leader in Afghanistan at the weekend, should serve as a warning to others who wish to do America harm. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, in Auckland, bus services in, out and around Sylvia Park are delayed by about 20 minutes because of heavy traffic off the beaten track. In Te Waipounamu, the Milford Road, State Highway 94, is closed between Hollyford Road Junction and Don River Bridge because of heavy rain forecast overnight that's going to increase the risk of avalanche. I'll have more news headlines and I'll update the traffic at about 5:40.
Kia ora rā e hoa. A law that could see violent criminals banned from even being on the same property as a firearm for up to a decade will come into force by the end of next week, along with tougher penalties for those who breach the orders. But critics say it doesn't go far enough because it doesn't give police warrantless search powers if someone has a firearms prohibition order against them, unless there's a reasonable cause to suspect a crime. Courts will have the discretion to impose FPOs on serious violent criminals. meaning they're banned from gun shops and ranges, can't be in a car where there's a gun or attend any activities involving a firearm, and are disqualified from holding a gun licence. I asked Police Minister Chris Hipkins if he thinks this law will be a game changer.
It's certainly, along with other things that the government's doing, going to provide the police with some more tools. I wouldn't say any one thing is going to solve the issues that we've got around violent crime and around gang offending, but the more that we can do to support the police in their work by giving them practical tools, then the more impact that we can have.
So then, if we're talking practical tools, what extra powers are they going to have to check up on people who have firearms prohibition orders against them? If they see a person driving past in a car and they know there's an order against them, can they search the vehicle?
If they have reasonable suspicion to suspect that the person has firearms, then yes, they will be able to do that.
So no extra powers?
Well, the key thing is that there's greater penalties now around, people illegally having firearms. At the moment, some of these people will be legally able to hold firearms and there won't be anything that police can do about it. This will be making sure that they can't continue to hold firearms.
Yeah, but to get to the penalty stage, Minister, you have to get a charge and a conviction. And to do that, you want to search a vehicle or a house. But you are not allowing any extra powers, are you? No warrantless searches in any circumstances under this legislation.
Well, no, actually, police can do warrantless searches now where they have reasonable grounds to suspect. Yeah, well, it was reasonable grounds to suspect. They have that ability to do that now, and so by creating a new infringement, it does provide them with new powers. It provides them new powers, or new offences that they can use their existing search powers to enforce.
The Police Association told you in its submission that basically, well, in essence, this piece of legislation is worth nothing unless you give them warrantless search powers.
Well, no,
gives them no extra scope. You can do what you can do now under existing legislation. This gives them nothing more, was their argument.
Well, no, because it prohibits a group of people from being able to hold firearms, and therefore, if the police have reason to suspect that those people who at the moment would not be prohibited from holding firearms, and under this law will be prohibited, if they have reasonable grounds to suspect that those people are holding firearms, then they will be able to search them and they will be able to charge them.
Yeah, but what is reasonable grounds, Minister? You see a gang member driving past in a vehicle, knowing that there have been about 20 drive-by shootings in Auckland. Unless you have some intel that they're off to do something, they are utterly powerless to search that vehicle, aren't they?
Well, those are the provisions in the search and surveillance legislation that we have at the moment. There's well-established case law and well-established precedent around what reasonable grounds for suspicion are, and I don't propose to change those.
But that is the whole point, isn't it? That this piece of legislation adds nothing. Is it not just window dressing? Because you have the Search and Surveillance Act, you have the Arms Act, you are replicating this without any extra powers. Yes, there'll be a prohibition order, but in order to enforce that, the police say they need warrantless searches.
Well, not everybody will argue that they need to have warrantless searches. That's not a unanimous view. And in fact,
it was the association's view, though, wasn't it, Minister?
Well, that's the Police Association's view, and I respect their view. But that's not all. That's not all of the advice the government's received. And in fact, some of the advice we've received is that in other countries where warrantless search powers have been provided in situations like this, they've disproportionately been used on people who were never intended to be covered by the law. So we have the real prospect that licensed, law-abiding firearms owners could find their rights being infringed if we introduced a warrantless search power without the protection that there had to be reasonable grounds to suspect.
The association, offered up a halfway house. They said if you don't want to go the whole hog, just allow warrantless searches of vehicles. Why not just do that? Why not include that?
Well, if you look at the powers that police have at the moment, if there's reasonable suspicion, then they can search.
And that's the key, Minister. They are saying allow a warrantless search without reasonable cause of a vehicle that contains a person with a firearms prohibition order. They wanted you to go a step further. That was a halfway position as they presented it. Why not even do that?
Well, I mean, I think you could argue that principle on just about any case. The reason that we have a reasonable grounds of suspicion requirement for warrantless searches is so that people aren't subject to warrantless searches where there's not reasonable grounds to do so. Ultimately, people who are abiding by the law shouldn't have their rights infringed unless there's reasonable grounds to suspect that they haven't been abiding by the law.
Isn't the fact that there is a firearms prohibition order against them, haven't they already met a benchmark for not necessarily being a law-abiding citizen?
And if they are complying with the requirements of the firearms prohibition order, if they're otherwise abiding by the law, then actually there should be a threshold, for us to be, going in and conducting warrantless searches.
How many offenders?
And that's not just a position that our government suddenly taken. That was the position taken by the John Key's government when the current search and surveillance legislation was put in place, and it was well canvassed at the time.
How many offenders will this apply to in any given year, do you think?
Well, it depends how many people the courts decide should be subjected to a firearms prohibition order. So if you look at the crimes that will
But
be
in terms
covered
of qualifying offences, how many offenders do you reckon could qualify for a firearms prohibition order in any given year?
I haven't got the complete numbers, but I'll run through the sorts of offences that we're covering. It's violent offences, so murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to manslaughter, discharging a firearm, aggravated robbery, sexual violation, offences with intent to cause harm or grievous bodily harm, violent sexual offences, strangulation, suffocation, terrorist offences, organised crime offences. So it's quite a wide range. I don't have the tally of how many people have been convicted of all of those different offences in over the last year or two.
And that's the Police Minister, Chris Hipkins there. It is 5:30. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it is, of course, time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e NINA, called Giles Beckford, joining us live from our Wellington studio. OK, Giles, now this is interesting. The government's had another go at easing up the consumer credit rules, blamed for making it tougher to get a loan, but there seems some debate over whether they've got it right again.
Exactly. Third time lucky. This is the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act, known in the trade as the CCCFA. If you remember, it came in last December. It was the government's move to protect vulnerable people from basically loan sharks and payday lenders, stop them getting into untenable levels of debt, which would only blight them for a long time ahead. Of course, there were the unintended consequences, and you remember it was pretty quick after that came into force. People were saying, look, they're trawling through my coffee receipts and my Netflix subscription and the smashed avocado and all the other spending that I've got. And they've declined me a loan. Now, these were people who normally were creditworthy in the past, had got loans. The government undertook to do a review. It tweaked the rules a little bit, and they only came into force just at the beginning of July. And we've been hearing anecdotally that they probably haven't made that much difference. So David Clark, as the relevant minister, has acted on a big report being done by MB, which is consulted through the finance sector. And he's basically just easing up those rules again so that the banks and the other lenders won't have to be so intrusive about your spending. They won't necessarily look at your discretionary spending to any extent. They will also be looking at also give you more leeway on things like credit card spending and buy now, pay later, so that won't count against you. And if needs be, they'll facilitate it, make it easier for people to reconfigure, restructure their debts, perhaps consolidate their debts so that they are overall financially more sound. Now, even with that, and these changes won't come into force until March next year, Bankers Association is saying, well, you're not bad, but could have done much better. They're suggesting that, in fact, that the emphasis of changes should be going on the lenders, if they would like the big penalties that are there in the Act to be eased, because it makes it too easy to target a bank rather than the payday lender, for instance. So they're saying, they're hoping that in the intervening period between this announcement and when they actually go into force and they work out the details, that perhaps some improvement will be made again. But you have to say, Third time lucky for the government, or third time unlucky, perhaps. We'll have to wait and see on this one. But at this stage, all the stories we're hearing is it's as tough as ever to get money from the bank. Perhaps not quite so intrusive, but still tough.
And Giles, this next one, prices for hospitality business are going higher. Do you mean to buy one or to buy a business? Yeah. Okay.
Who would have thought? The one sector you would think, I'm not putting my money into that one.
Given all the COVID struggles, yeah.
Given all the COVID struggles, you can't get staff, the rising cost of goods and services. But apparently, albeit from a low level, but the prices for hospitality businesses have gone up about 40% in the past year. Now, ABC Sales, which is a company that specialises in selling small businesses in particular, they say, look, perhaps some signs of confidence returning for the hospitality industry. The average price for a bar or an eatery, around $284,000. Now, that is an average, obviously more in the main centres, but they're suggesting a hint of optimism. It may be, of course, with borders reopening and with more free flow of migrants and tourists, that their fortunes are looking up, and we hope so.
Or we're all so over the pandemic, we're eating and drinking our feelings, Giles.
Well, I don't know. Where are you getting the money from?
Let's take a spin around the markets.
All right, the share market, the top 50 indexes, a rather miserly 7-point gain. Should note that A2 Milk, which is the big infant formula producer, put on a trading halt about 10 minutes to 5. It was basically in response to media speculation coming out of Australia that they are close to getting FDA approval for selling their infant formula into the States. Remembering there's been a massive shortage there, a bit of a payday if they get the approval. They've just responded in the past few minutes saying, look, we're still under active consideration. We've got no confirmation one way or the other, so we'll wait and see on that one. Should note also the Reserve Bank of Australia raised its cash rate 50 basis points, 1.85%. They're a little bit not quite so stern in their commentary about fighting future inflation, so we'll see whether they keep up that level of rate rises. In the currency market, New Zealand dollar 63.1 US and 90.6 Australian.
Thank you, Giles. Giles Beckford, live there from our Wellington studio. Despite a list of changes announced for the health workforce this week, there is no word on whether unvaccinated midwives can return to the struggling sector. The College of Midwives is calling for the government to reconsider the evidence it's using to prevent them from working. Meanwhile, their colleagues have mixed feelings about their return. Rosie Gordon reports.
Up and down the country, midwives are under pressure and facing demand.
So I work in Northland, and it's pretty hard out there with women, trying to find midwives. You have women crying on the phone looking for a midwife.
We've got quite a large birthing community and not very many midwives available to us in the Hutt Valley. So we're pretty short on the ground.
So I am based in the beautiful Central Otago region. It's an amazing profession to be in, but we are turning women away daily, which is really hard.
The College of Midwives wrote to the Health Minister and COVID-19 Response Minister back in May, asking for a review of the evidence behind the vaccine mandate. And those calls are continuing. Chief Executive Alison Eddy says the mandate exacerbated shortages, particularly in the regions.
So we see things like births on the side of the road, women having to travel further to access care, all of those sorts of unintended and unfortunate consequences can occur when you simply don't have enough midwives to run a service.
The College of Midwives doesn't have any data on how many left their jobs because of vaccine mandates. Midwife Annalise says 7 out of her 12 colleagues in Thames Coromandel walked away from their jobs over the jab. She wants them to be able to come back.
The risk of having no midwife is greater than the risk of having an unvaccinated midwife, and that's the reality that we're facing in our region.
Susie Fothersgill, a midwife in the Hutt Valley, is also in favour of bringing them back.
Well, I completely support unvaccinated midwives returning to work. A lot of them are our local bread and butter midwives who've been trained in New Zealand. They know the systems really well. 1 or 2 midwives who are returning to LMC practice, it makes a big difference.
But this rural midwife in Northland, who did not want to be named, isn't so sure.
Yeah, I'm on the fence with this. As midwives, we, totally agree with people choosing what's
good and what they think is good for their own bodies and their babies. And I'm probably against it because, we work with vulnerable people. I think it's just safety for us as well as everybody else that we are looking after.
This midwife in Central Otago says mandates aren't the issue, rather a chronic lack of funding and tough working conditions.
There's like a shelf life for a community midwife. It's sort of 4 to 7 years. This sector of healthcare, I feel, has been chronically neglected. And that's why we are where we are. We're not here suddenly. It's nothing to do with midwives not being immunised.
So how do expecting parents feel about the idea of having an unvaccinated midwife? This Wellington woman couldn't get a community midwife for her first baby because so many had left the profession. But while that was daunting, she says she wouldn't want an unvaccinated midwife delivering her child.
I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable with it. And while I can see that the environment around the need for vaccines has changed in terms of being able to use rat tests and other kinds of immunity that people have, it's more about what it says around that midwife's attitude towards vaccinations generally, particularly for my child.
Politicians are weighing in too. The National Party's COVID-19 spokesperson Chris Bishop wants the mandates gone.
We should essentially get rid of the mandates in our public health system for nurses and midwives, for example. We've got a desperate shortage of both.
The COVID-19 response minister, Aisha Verrill's office, says a Ministry of Health review into vaccine mandates for health workers is expected to be with ministers for consideration in the coming weeks.
Let us know your feedback on that one. Should unvaccinated midwives be allowed to return to the sector? 2101 on the text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Te Piramia, Jacinda Ardern has wrapped up her whirlwind trip to Samoa with a splash of cash to help the island nation reopen after COVID-19 and prepare for climate change. The funding announcements mark the business end of Jacinda Ardern's visit, a celebration of 60 years since both countries signed the Treaty of Friendship. Our political reporter Giles Dexter sent this from Apia.
Not even 24 hours on the ground in Samoa, but still time for all the pomp and ceremony one would expect. The morning began with high-powered meetings, the PM sitting down with Samoa's head of state and its Prime Minister, Fiameneumi Mataafa. Climate change was topic number one. New Zealand has put aside $15 million to support Samoa's climate change policies, but it is flexible funding for Samoa to prioritise where it goes.
We want to work alongside the Pacific with their priorities. They're best placed to identify what are the most pressing issues. For Samoa, they've already said that renewable energy is one, but also flood protections. So working with them on those things that will provide greater resilience and mitigation.
New Zealand has also pledged $12 million to help rebuild the historic Savalolo market in Apia. Jacinda Ardern said the rebuild will help Samoa's economy recover as it reopens to tourists and transitions away from COVID-19 lockdowns.
Many New Zealanders who have visited Samoa, of course the diaspora in New Zealand, they know that marketplace. It is part of the economy here. Locals and tourists visit that place.
The market burned down in 2016. Locals describe it as a lifeline.
It's a lot of importance because I have a shop in here. I can make some food and I can buy this in Savalalo.
And really good for the new market for helping Samoa.
The RSC worker scheme was also discussed. Fiame wants to take another look at the programme as Samoa tries to attract workers back to its tourism and public sectors.
It won't be easy because that has been an impact with the RSC, and we've discussed this issue.
This morning's meetings follow an evening of celebration marking 60 years since the two countries signed a treaty of friendship.
The treaty is representative of the unique relationship between Samoa and Aotearoa, New Zealand. We don't have a treaty of this kind with any other country.
This anniversary is particularly significant for Fiame. Her father was Prime Minister when Samoa gained independence in June 1962, and 2 months later when the treaty was signed.
Personally, I feel an emotional twinge, as this will be the second time this year that history has repeated itself.
The Prime Minister says it was a warm and productive trip.
Whether or not it's 24 hours or a week, the ability to come here, renew and recommit to the treaty can be as productive as if we were here for days.
A short trip, but one that reaffirms the unique relationship between two long-standing friends.
It is, let's call it 5:45. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, do get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Let us know your thoughts on whether midwives should be vaccinated and if you think the firearms prohibition orders will actually work without extended search powers for the police. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. Let's go to the headlines now. Ane a iwi mina pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. 6 young inmates protesting on the roof of Hawke's Bay Regional Prison have now all come down, and the Department of Corrections says a full review of the incident will be carried out and the matter will be referred to police. But a justice advocacy organisation says it's worried about what consequences the inmates will face. A bill that lowers the disclosure threshold for donations to political parties from $15,000 to $5,000 has passed its first reading at Parliament. The Electoral Amendment Bill makes an exemption for New Zealanders trapped overseas to be able to vote in next year's election and will also be used to close a loophole in the political donations regime. The government is having a second go at easing tight lending rules, blamed for a credit crunch earlier this year. The type of expenses to be considered will be narrowed, and the treatment of credit card and buy now pay later spending will be relaxed. The Prime Minister is heading home from Samoa after celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Friendship and offering a cash injection to help the Pacific nation reopen after COVID. New Zealand's pledged $12 million to help rebuild the historic Savalalo market, as well as $15 million to support Samoa's climate change policies. And it's Epitoma o Te Reo Māori Kuki Airani, or Cook Islands Language Week, and events are taking place across the country with the aim of igniting a love of language in the next generation. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the main centres around the country, there's a strong winds warning over Rimutaka Hill in Wellington. And in Auckland, be aware that in a few hours on Auckland's motorways, there's going to be a full closure of the southbound lanes on State Highway 1 between Upper Harbour Highway and Oniwa Road. I'll have the latest news and weather for you at 6.
Thanks, Evie. New Zealand healthcare workers say the government's new health recruitment service is ignoring the need to keep its existing people. And with better pay and working conditions offered overseas, many are now making the choice to fly. Louise Tanuth reports.
Taylor is a community mental health nurse. Over the last 5 years, her caseload has been increasing, and so has her level of burnout. She's now exploring different options with agencies over in Australia, with promises of better pay and working conditions.
What they are offering is 3 to 4 times more than what I am currently getting. They're also offering flights. Other agencies have offered accommodation for myself and my family, assistance with permanent residence as well.
While she's welcoming the government's efforts to attract nurses from overseas to work here, she says Kiwi nurses are feeling overlooked. Many of her nursing friends have recently crossed the ditch, and she believes many will follow, with disappointment in yesterday's announcement.
A lot of New Zealand nurses are really feeling let down by the government because there seems to be no attempt made by the government to help retain nurses who are currently working in New Zealand. Seems like we have to always fight tooth and nail to get what we ask for.
This nurse, who doesn't want to be named, says nursing has changed drastically since she started.
It's not the same workplace that I went into 9 years ago. We're so much more under-resourced, so people are constantly doing over the FTEs. You're constantly asked to do more.
She's also eyeing up other opportunities across the ditch. It's no small move with 2 small children and her partner. She never imagined it would come to this.
We're just over it. We're really over it. 3 years ago when I went on maternity leave, I could take the whole year's leave and we were comfortable. This time around, we've noticed that I have to go back to work early. Yeah, I'm just done. I'm done feeling undervalued.
Teresa Walsh is a New Zealand registered nurse and is trained as a midwife overseas, working in Ireland, Australia and the UK. Now she's decided to return to Aotearoa after being offered a job as a midwife in central Otago. Because she's registered in Australia under the Trans-Tasman Agreement, she can practice here too. But she says the process to return has been far from smooth sailing.
Working as a registered midwife in Australia, and yet I have to go and prove my original documentation. Why do I need to do this again? I have to get police clearance for every country I have worked in since I was 18. You know, they just put a barrier up.
A barrier, she says, is making her second-guess her decision.
I might not bother at all. Picking fruit in Central Otago seems not a bad idea. Just makes me want to go back to Australia. They would fly me over, I'd do a 3-month contract, and I would earn it's almost twice as much.
It is 11 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. One of the masterminds of the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001 has been killed in a US drone strike. Ayman al-Zawahiri was Osama bin Laden's right-hand man and has been leader of al-Qaeda since bin Laden's death in 2011. Al-Zawahiri was assassinated over the weekend and his death's been described as a major blow to the terrorist group. The Egyptian-born surgeon turned jihadist rose to become one of the world's most wanted men and helped plan terrorist attacks around the world. The ABC's Matt Bamford reports.
On a remote hillside in Afghanistan stand two of the world's most wanted men, al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden and his deputy Ayman al-Zawahiri. It's 2001, the year the terrorist group gained international infamy for its September 11 assault on the United States.
Right. Okay, guys. Let's stand fast, all right?
The attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon left thousands dead and shaped America's foreign policy for 20 years, launching the war on terror. With bin Laden, al-Zawahiri inspired Islamist extremists across the world with messages like this one, broadcast from 2011.
Al-Sheikh Osama bin Laden assigned me to emphasise this. Therefore, I advise every mujahideen to apply rules of al-Sharia and to take in consideration the needs of the Muslims before initiating any jihad operation.
His trail of destruction reached across the globe to include bombings in Egypt, Kenya and Pakistan that left hundreds of civilians dead or injured. Born in Cairo in 1951 to a prominent family, al-Zawahiri was a gifted student influenced by hardline Islamist literature. As a 15-year-old, he founded a militant group to overthrow Egypt's secular government. He was arrested in 1981 for conspiring to assassinate the country's president, imprisoned for 3 years in dire conditions with hundreds of other co-accused. After his release, al-Zawahiri travelled to Pakistan, where he first met bin Laden while working in a hospital. He became the Saudi millionaire's personal physician, and the pair formed an alliance to strike out against the West and its Middle Eastern allies. Following bin Laden's assassination in 2011, al-Zawahiri became al-Qaeda's leader.
The United States has vowed to hunt down and kill the new head of al-Qaeda. The long-time...
Under his rule, the organisation's influence waned as the Islamic State rose, but al-Zawahiri remained a target. After decades on the run, he was killed in a CIA drone strike in Afghanistan over the weekend. US President Joe Biden confirming he ordered the attack.
My fellow Americans, on Saturday, at my direction, the United States successfully concluded an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan that killed the emir of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. You know, Zawahiri was bin Laden's leader. He was with him the whole time. He was his number 2 man, his deputy at the time the terrorist attack 9/11. He was deeply involved in the planning of 9/11.
US officials say it's the biggest blow to the militant group since bin Laden's assassination. In a statement, a Taliban spokesman strongly condemned the strike, calling it a violation of international principles.
Tensions are rising between the US and China over reports the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will visit Taiwan. China says it won't sit idly by if the visit goes ahead. Reports suggest Ms Pelosi will visit tonight in the highest level of support from Washington in 2 decades. For its part, the White House says China shouldn't overreact, while also warning the US won't be intimidated. The ABC's Bill Birtles reports from Taiwan.
As reports filtered out saying Nancy Pelosi will likely visit Taipei on Tuesday evening, China's military propaganda kicked into overdrive. The Eastern Command of the People's Liberation Army releasing a slick video of soldiers and hardware titled "Battle Ready, Awaiting Orders for War." On the waters of the South China Sea, the militaries of the world's 2 superpowers are already in close proximity. A US carrier group has been positioned there, while China has abruptly announced military exercises. A government spokesman in Beijing, Zhao Lijian, is setting expectations high that China will respond forcefully if Nancy Pelosi does fly to Taiwan.
We would like to tell the United States once again that the Chinese People's Liberation Army will never sit idly by. China will take resolute responses and strong countermeasures to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity.
The rhetoric, state media warnings and military drills are much stronger than the condemnation Beijing usually wheels out when US political figures head to Taiwan. Some analysts fear Xi Jinping has backed himself into a corner where his military has to escalate or he'll look weak. But Ian Chong, an analyst at the National University of Singapore, hopes the situation doesn't get out of control.
When you have lots of military vessels acting in robust ways in relative close proximity to each other, there's a possibility that an accident can happen. I mean, if things get just a little bit out of control, we could have a crisis.
Analyst Ian Chong is of the view that China's sabre-rattling over Nancy Pelosi's visit is still mainly bluster.
Beijing probably doesn't want escalation and certainly doesn't want uncontrolled escalation.
Somewhat under the radar in all this is the other woman involved in creating this historic standoff. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen was on a warship last week in battle fatigues watching military drills. This week, she's keeping a low profile, ahead of a visit that would be a major diplomatic victory in her efforts to resist Xi Jinping's pressure.
As we've been reporting, the gold rush for Kiwi athletes continues at the Commonwealth Games, with more in the pool and on the track overnight. In the tiny Coromandel town of Colville, a lot of eyes were on the hometown boy, Andrew Jeffcoat, as he took gold in the 50-metre backstroke final this morning. His dad, Carl, was one of them, glass charged and ready to go, convinced it was in the bag even before the starter's gun.
It's a game of seconds, hundreds of seconds. You haven't got 40 minutes to fix it up. You only got real short time, so pretty good, pretty proud.
Who did you watch with this morning?
Just me and bottle of Johnny.
And what was it like? How are you in the lead up to a race and watching it?
Oh, I knew he had this one, so it was pretty calm, pretty good, bloody good.
Where did your confidence come from, Carl? You said you knew he had it.
Yeah, after his 100 disappointment, he was tuned into it and dedicated, and he didn't go so good off the starts, and so the starts are so important on the 50, so yeah, bits them all on the 100, or like all 3 starts in the 100, he beat everybody off the start, so.
Pretty amazing, eh?
Yeah, no, pretty good for a young fella from Colville.
How do you feel about it? Make you proud?
Yeah, no, it's been hard work. He's worked hard and stuck to it and had some ups and downs, and no, he's bloody good. Being proud.
How many people in Colville do you reckon watched him?
Probably all of them, so. From what I've seen on Facebook, he's been, good.
The whole town was in their lounges, yep, eyes glued to him.
Hopefully.
Have you had a chance to have a yarn with him?
Yeah, a quick yarn after he finished, but he's got his 200 tonight in backstroke, so that's got to settle down hopefully and get ready for that one, so.
How was he when you spoke to him, Carl?
Good, top of the world.
Buzzing?
Yeah, he's...
What did you say to him?
Yeah, well done, mate.
Good on you. Good on you. Hey, I noticed when he got to the end of the poll and he realised he'd won, He did this funny little thing with this sort of hand up by his head, like a kind of fan or something, some kind of symbol. Do you know what that was all about?
No, I'm not sure yet, but I think it was when they were back training in Spain, in between the World Champs and this, there was some people giving a hard time about something, and they said they were turkeys, so I think they gave them the turkey sign, or I'm not too sure.
Oh, well, he can afford to do it. He's an absolute champion. A lot of years put into it in the pool, yeah?
Yeah, a lot of years, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but no, it's kept going. It's just hard to do in a sport. There's no money involved in it, so, you know, you got to honour them. They're bloody dedicated.
Yeah, so did you have yourself a wee drink to celebrate?
Oh, only a litre of whiskey.
Has it been a good day then, I take it?
Yeah, no, it has. No, it's well-deserved day. He's bloody done good. The whole team's done good.
They're just smoking it up in that pool.
Yeah, hopefully now Southern gets more money and more help and everything, so...
Yeah, tell us about that, Carl. How much of a struggle is it? What do they need?
Money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's their livelihood. It's their full-time job. You know, they're training 60 hours a week, getting no money for it, so we've got to try to make money elsewhere, you know, so...
Hey, Carl, are you a good swimmer?
Oh, in a spa bar, probably, yeah.
And that was Carl Jeffcoat. Some of your feedback now on midwives. This person says, I wouldn't mind so much that my midwife was unvaccinated, but I don't think I'd want someone who apparently doesn't trust medicine to be my midwife. This one says, I'm not sure I want an anti-vax health professional anywhere near the health system. Kara's got in touch to tell Morning Report off for playing the original Shorty Street theme this morning, saying it's been stuck in her head all day, but she can't remember the words. Is it you or is it me? Lately I've been lost, it seems. There you go, Kara.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Koiwi Ashton tēnei. The Corrections Department says youth inmates in a rooftop standoff at Hawke's Bay Regional Prison just wanted to use the sports facilities. 6 17 to 19-year-olds ended their almost 24-hour protest this afternoon. One came down overnight, but 5 remained in freezing temperatures. Corrections Chief Custodial Officer Neil Beals told Checkpoint something went wrong yesterday.
They'd been told that they could access the sports area earlier on in that day. Something had occurred throughout that day where the units weren't kept in a clean and tidy state, or something had gone wrong that delayed them from going in or stopped them from going in, and they reacted to that in the way that they did.
Neil Beals says a full review will be carried out and the matter will be referred to police. A bill that lowers the disclosure threshold for donations to political parties from $15,000 to $5,000 has passed its first reading at Parliament. The Electoral Amendment Bill makes an exemption for New Zealanders trapped overseas to be able to vote in next year's election. The government will also use the bill to close a loophole in the political donations regime. A High Court ruling regarding the New Zealand First Foundation appears to have exposed a legal gap where parties could use shadow entities to hide funding. Cabinet will sign off on a draft amendment within the next 4 weeks, which will then be wrapped into the legislation. The bill has been referred to the Justice Select Committee. An award-winning Māori GP says addressing poverty in lower socioeconomic areas would help ease stress at her clinic. Dr Matire Harwood received the Royal New Zealand College of GPs Community Service Medal for her services toward Māori health during the COVID-19 pandemic. She says as well as more Māori GPs, there's a need to look at improving inequities Māori face.
I think that's going to start with, living wage, improving opportunities for our kids to get into schools and further education after that. Those sorts of things are definitely going to help and take some of that strain off what we're seeing in our clinic.
Dr Harwood says more services around mental health and addiction are critical in helping ease the workload at Papakura Marae. The government is having a second go at easing tight lending rules blamed for a credit crunch earlier this year. Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark says the type of expenses to be considered will be narrowed, the treatment of credit card and buy now later spending will be relaxed, and borrowers helped to restructure their debt. The Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act came in last December, but was blamed for being too restrictive and leading to creditworthy people being refused reduced finance. An initial rule relaxation came into force last month. Mr Clark says the latest changes will come into force next March and should balance access to credit against preventing predatory and harmful lending. The United States President says a US drone strike, which killed an al-Qaeda leader in Afghanistan at the weekend, should serve as a warning to others who wish to do America harm. Mr Biden says Ayman al-Zawahiri was deeply involved in the September 11th attacks on the US in 2001, which killed nearly 3,000 people. He says the killing may mean closure to the families of those victims.
To those around the world who continue to seek to harm the United States, hear me now. We will always remain vigilant, and we will act, and we will always do what is necessary to ensure the safety and security of Americans at home and around the globe.
Meanwhile, a Taliban spokesperson has condemned the drone strike, calling it a violation of international principles. Manawatu locals are being warned to watch out for fraudulent sales on social media and online websites. A 38-year-old man is facing 21 charges of obtaining by deception, the offending reportedly happening across the region in the past 2 months. Police allege the man took vehicles, claiming to have paid for them. They say more charges are likely. The man has been remanded in custody and is due back in court later this month. Detective Sergeant Carl Newton says there's been a notable increase in people handing over property to people who haven't paid for the item. WorkSafe says it could take up to 12 months to investigate an accident in Rotorua in which a woman fell into a sinkhole and suffered serious burns. The woman from Australia remains in a serious but stable condition at Waikato Hospital. Amy Williams reports.
WorkSafe says it has opened a formal investigation into the incident. The geothermal sinkhole in Rotorua has been filled in and steam vents installed. The woman was entering Whakarewarewa village last Thursday afternoon when the ground fell away. The sinkhole was deep and steam-filled, and a volcanologist said heavy rain may have contributed to the collapse. The village is temporarily closed.
It's Epitoma o Te Reo Māori Kukiairani, or Cook Islands Language Week in Aotearoa. Events have been taking place across the country with the aim of igniting a love of language in the next generation. Tupu Araiti, who's from the village of Tupapa in Rarotonga, says seeing his grandchildren's faces light up to the beat of drums at last night's language celebration filled a void.
To see that in your grandchildren, almost a piece of you is being rekindled or ignited in the child is kind of fulfilling. I speak to my girls, to my children, mainly on greeting side of things, kia orana, ia manuia, te koe, simple sort of terms, and they respond appropriately. Me taki e papa.
And part one of a documentary series about the Dawn raids has aired, marking 1 year since the Prime Minister formally apologised to Pasifika communities affected by the notorious raids. The producer of How We Made It to 50 Years, Josiah Tuala Mali'i, says the series explains how the Polynesian Panthers started their advocacy in 1971. Some of the advocates were as young as 16. Mr. Tuala Mali'i says the series documents the Dawn raids period up until last year's apology. The first of the three-part series has premiered on YouTube. To sport, and New Zealand has owned the Commonwealth Games velodrome, with the track cyclists winning a record 8 gold medals. The track program is now over, having delivered 13 medals in 4 days. It means there won't be a rush of gold medals tonight, but as Felicity Reid reports from Birmingham, there are still several New Zealand athletes in medal contention.
New Zealand will contest bronze medal matches in bowls in the women's 4 and parasport pairs, while the Tall Ferns 3x3 basketballers play Australia for bronze. Back in the pool, Eve Thomas is chasing a medal in the 800-metre freestyle, and Andrew Jeffcoat can add to the gold he won today when he competes in the 200-metre backstroke. The athletics program starts with the throws, pole vault and the 100 metres. New Zealand remains in third on the medal tally with 13 gold and 24 medals in total. Australia are atop with 30 gold.
3 uncapped players have been named in the Black Ferns squad to play Australia in this month's 2-test series as they continue their preparation for their Rugby World Cup title defence later this year. First 5, Ruahei Demont, who led the side in the recent Pacific 4 Series win, will co-captain the side with Waikato loose forward Kennedy Simon. And former Warriors head coach Andrew McFadden is returning to the Auckland NRL club to become General Manager of Recruitment and Development. McFadden was head coach between 2014 to 2016. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples new savage indie rock from Auckland's Luna Vela, along with the latest from dance floor duo Charlotte Adigeri and Boulez Pupul. Geographers Louise Richards and Dr. Gail Tipa discuss using Mātauranga Māori to manage our fresh water, while Jamie McMichael talks about Seabed 2030, a project to map all of it before this decade is out. Join me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And you're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northwest gales are affecting many southern and eastern areas of the South Island, also Waded Upper and Wellington until tomorrow morning. From Northland to Bay of Plenty, mainly fine. Isolated showers more widespread about eastern Bay of Plenty tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. There's a chance of a shower tomorrow afternoon or evening. From Waikato to Wellington and Waded Upper, including the central high country. Mostly cloudy with a few showers, turning to rain for a time tomorrow, then clearing from the south. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. A few showers, but rain for a time in Nelson early tomorrow, then becoming fine everywhere. Otago and Southland, a few showers, clearing later tomorrow. Dakiuda, Stewart Island, also Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Periods of rain with possible thunderstorms. Easing to showers tomorrow morning, then clearing from Bulla and Westland. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, a few showers tomorrow. It's coming up to 10 minutes past 6. I'll have the latest news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. China has warned the US not to include Taiwan as one of the destinations for Nancy Pelosi's tour of Asia, threatening retaliation if the visit goes ahead. The US has not confirmed whether the Speaker will visit the island that China claims as part of its territory, but the White House says it will not be intimidated by Beijing. CNN's Will Ripley reports.
The latest fiery threats from Beijing reaching a fever pitch. Chinese military showing off its tactical might in a video posted online Monday with text reading, "It will bury incoming enemies." It comes as a high-level potential visit from the U.S. defies warnings from Chinese officials. Sources telling CNN House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is expected to stop in Taiwan, which China regards as a breakaway province. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman warning Monday that Pelosi's visit would seriously undermine China's sovereignty and lead to grave consequences. Threats by China not to play with fire. In a stop, one White House official tells CNN is consistent with America's stance on Taiwan.
It is very much in keeping with our policy and consistent with our support to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act. We shouldn't be, as a country, we shouldn't be intimidated by that rhetoric or those potential actions. This is an important trip for the Speaker to be on, and we're going to do whatever we can to support her.
A senior Taiwanese government official and a U.S. official tell CNN that Pelosi's stop is expected to come as part of her tour of Asia, where she's leading a congressional delegation to the Indo-Pacific region, with visits to Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan. It's not clear when Pelosi will arrive in Taiwan. As of now, it's not on her public itinerary. For Taiwan, the timing is sensitive, as the Chinese president prepares to seek an unprecedented third term at his upcoming party Congress, where he aims to promote China's strength and stability. Now, caught between two superpowers, the world's only Chinese-speaking democracy prepares to defend itself from China's massive military. Something it's been doing for decades. Taiwanese troops training to defend this island in the event of a David and Goliath scenario, a fear stoked by Russia's war on Ukraine. But Taiwan has also been riding this rhetorical roller coaster for decades. As the latest U.S.-China threats dominated global headlines, they were barely mentioned by the media in Taiwan. The island with the most to lose has lost interest.
I don't think they will retaliate. I don't worry about it. Mainland China is just threatening us. If they really decide to invade Taiwan, they can kill it within 2 to 3 days. They don't need to talk much.
I'm not concerned. China has done the same thing many times, but exchanges between Taiwan and the US shouldn't be stopped because of this.
President Biden says a US drone strike has killed the al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in the Afghan capital Kabul on Saturday. Mr. Biden says al-Zawahiri was deeply involved in the September 11th attacks on the US in 2001, which killed nearly 3,000 people. The Taliban has condemned the strike, calling it a violation of international principles. The BBC's Jonathan Savage reports.
When it invaded Afghanistan in 2001, the United States said the goal was to stop the Taliban regime hosting terrorists like the al-Qaeda leadership who plotted 9/11. Now the Taliban are back, and who did the US find living in the heart of Kabul? The emir of al-Qaeda himself, Ayman al-Zawahiri. They didn't just find him. On Saturday, they killed him with a drone strike revealed in recent hours by President Joe Biden speaking from the White House.
After relentlessly seeking Zawahiri for years under Presidents Bush, Obama, and Trump, our intelligence community located Zawahiri earlier this year. He had moved to downtown Kabul to reunite with members of his immediate family. After carefully considering the clear and convincing evidence of his location, I authorized a precision strike that would remove him from the battlefield once and for all. This mission was carefully planned, rigorously minimized the risk of harm to other civilians. And 1 week ago, after being advised that the conditions were optimal, I gave the final approval to go get him. And the mission was a success. None of his family members were hurt, and there were no civilian casualties. I'm sharing this news with the American people now, after confirming the mission's total success through the painstaking work of our counterterrorism community and key allies and partners. My administration has kept congressional leaders informed as well. When I ended our military mission in Afghanistan almost a year ago, I made the decision that after 20 years of war, the United States no longer needed thousands of boots on the ground in Afghanistan to protect America from terrorists who seek to do us harm. And I made a promise to the American people that we continue to conduct effective counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan and beyond. We've done just that. In February, our forces conducted a daring mission in Syria that eliminated the emir of ISIS. Last month, we took out another key ISIS leader. Now we have eliminated the emir of al-Qaeda. He will never again allow Afghanistan to become a terrorist safe haven, because he is gone, and we're going to make sure that nothing else happens. You know, it can't be a launching pad against the United States. We're going to see to it that won't happen. This operation is a clear demonstration that we will, we can, and we'll always make good on the solemn pledge. My administration will continue to vigilantly monitor and address threats from al-Qaeda, no matter where they emanate from.
The death toll from catastrophic flooding in the US state of Kentucky is expected to keep rising, with hundreds of people still unaccounted for. Resources such as food and clean drinking water are desperately needed, but even more concerning for officials, there are imminent warnings of more thunderstorms and further heavy flooding. CNN's Diane Gallagher reports.
Certainly the deadliest and the most devastating of my lifetime.
Kentucky's governor confirming today at least 35 people are dead in the flood-stricken Commonwealth, including 4 siblings from Knott County, the youngest just 2 years old. This as the desperate search for hundreds of missing people continues, with the looming threat of more rain.
There are hundreds of unaccounted for people, minimum, and we just don't have a firm grasp on that.
Floodwaters knocked out vital power, washed away roads and bridges, and overwhelmed eastern Kentucky communities, making some rescue efforts nearly impossible.
If they get in that river, it's going to be dangerous for them.
Randy Polly shot this video showing someone jumping into action to save an elderly woman and her family.
He was in there for like 2 minutes, what seemed like for an eternity. Then he come back out. He said, I finally found him.
Another rescue. A 17-year-old saved herself and her dog by swimming to a neighbor's roof when flash flooding started last Thursday. Her dad writing on Facebook, "We lost everything today, everything except what matters most." Emergency shelters are opening across eastern Kentucky, including Gospel Light Baptist Church in Hazard. Nicole Neese is staying here with her family.
I woke up at 4:50. I heard a loud noise, and whenever I did, I got my flashlight and I looked out the window, and it was already halfway up our living room window.
She tells us they got out with only the clothing on their backs.
There's nothing left. Everything's destroyed.
Niece's sister, Karen Daughtry, says this isn't the first tragedy for her family.
2 years ago, we had lost everything to a fire, and we were just now getting back on our feet. I mean, it's just devastating that we have to go through it again so soon.
And Kentucky's Governor, Andy Beshear, has now confirmed another 2 deaths, taking the toll to 37, while again warning people of more dangerous weather approaching the region. The first ship carrying grain from Ukraine is on its way to Libya under an agreement with Russia to ease its 5-month blockade of Ukraine ports. The Rizzoni is following a strict route through the Black Sea, which has been mined along a safe corridor negotiated by the United Nations and Turkey. The shipment of 26,000 tonnes of corn is part of efforts to ease a growing global food crisis. The BBC's James Waterhouse watched the Rizzoni leave Odessa.
A familiar yet unfamiliar sight. For the first time in a long time, a major artery is unblocked. And a ship, which could save millions from hunger, moving slowly into hostile waters. The Rizzoni, the first grain vessel to leave Ukraine since the 24th of February, making its way out to Lebanon via Istanbul, as will all the ships in this agreement, and the hope is that it will be the first of many in a route which will allow vessels in and out of what is still an active war zone. Ukraine was seen as the world's breadbasket before this war. 5 million tonnes of farm produce left its ports every month. The closure of the Black Sea has forced it to use other routes, reducing exports by more than 2/3. Some of the world's poorest countries, with many in Africa, are Ukraine's biggest grain customers. It's a crisis which affects those far as well as near. I met Schotter. His company stores and exports grain all over the world.
Exporting the grain harvest is of vital importance. Our country gathers harvest to supply many parts of the world. We must export for our farmers, for our country, and to feed the world.
Despite little to no trust between Ukraine and Russia, necessity seems to be driving this deal. Not just for the government, but for the crews who've been out of work since February. We work in waters all over the world, Alexander tells me. We deal with pirates and other difficulties of the sea. Ukrainian sailors are not frightened by mines or other challenges. The hope is that the Rizzoni will be the first of many ships to make this journey in the coming days. For now, this is more symbolic than sizable, but it's a start.
And another 17 grain ships are also ready to sail from Odessa. It is 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Solomon Islands government is seizing financial and editorial control of the Pacific nation's public broadcaster. The broadcaster is being ordered to censor stories portraying the government in a negative light. Observers say it is a blow to the country's democratic system. The ABC's John Daly reports.
From now on, only good news stories are allowed. The Solomons government says its censorship will protect the public from misinformation and lies.
Coming up in the bulletin, Prime Minister Manasa Sogavare has ruled out any establishment of foreign military base.
The Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation has been ordered to censor stories critical of the government. The order doesn't apply to other privately owned news organisations, but Honiara journalist Dorothy Wickham, who works for a different outlet, told the ABC's The World that she doesn't know what the new rule means for political debate.
Because we haven't seen it happen before, so we're going to have to watch what the government's going to do. Now, if the opposition gets on SIBC and starts criticising government policy, which every opposition does. That's not unusual in a democratic society or in a democratic process. Now, would government disallow SIBC to air that story or that interview? That is the question that we're asking. However, I know officials in government are saying, no, We're not going to do that.
The Solomon Islands government has reportedly denied it's taking full control and says it's simply removing the broadcaster's status as a state-owned enterprise. Instead, it will remain a statutory body governed by the country's Broadcasting Act in a similar structure to the ABC. But University of South Pacific journalism professor Shailendra Singh, who's based in Fiji, says the orders to censor negative stories are most worrying.
But there seems to be no doubt that the government is determined to take control of the national broadcaster, editorially and financially. It will be able to do that. I don't think there's any way in which the government can be stopped. Now, this latest move by the government, what it has done with the SIBC, is bring it closer to a media in a communist system than in a democracy. And to me, the question in my mind is, what next?
Graham Smith is from the ANU's Pacific Affairs Department and says it's a concerning sign of Solomon's Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare's authoritarian approach to the media.
Yes, it is clearly a step towards taking greater control over it, making it very much dependent on government funding and hinting rather strongly that such funding might be withdrawn should they continue reporting the way they report.
Now, with this move in mind, as well as Manasseh Sogavare's intention to delay the general elections next year, what picture is this painting for the future of democracy in the Solomons?
Look, democracy, I think, is fairly robust. I don't think we're going to see a sort of a coup-type culture develop. But, he does seem very much emboldened by, the financial backing that he's getting from the PRC. And he does seem, shall we say, more determined to hold on to power, not just out of greed for power. I think he genuinely believes that he holds the key to the future of the Solomon Islands. So this desire to control isn't just megalomania. He does genuinely believe in the future of the country. Journalism
professor Shailendra Singh says Solomon's democracy will suffer as a result of less media freedom.
Media is the last line of defence. Right, so if the media are captured, who will sound the alarm? And it's happening right before our eyes. So it's a major, major concern.
India is in the middle of a water crisis and it's having an unexpected impact on people in rural communities. In some areas, a lack of running water is making it hard for men to find wives. 3 years ago, India's Prime Minister launched a campaign to bring tap water to every Indian home by 2024. But 200 million homes are still waiting. The BBC's Devyariya reports from in central India, many women are no longer willing to collect and use water from dirty rivers.
What do you call men who have tried to get married but failed repeatedly? Rejects, I'm told. Like Bal Govind.
I was 22 when the first marriage proposal came. In total, 5 families came to meet my parents. But when they got to know of the water crisis here, they left.
He is not alone. It's a growing list of single men. Fetching water is considered women's work here. And men are unwilling to share the burden.
I have other work and she has different work. She has to cook food, clean the house. I have to tend to the animals, farm, and travel to attend social gatherings.
These central Indian plains used to be green. But after repeated droughts, the region has dried up.
The terrain is rocky and the distance is long, so it's very hard to carry pots of water repeatedly on your head from that source of water to the village, which is almost a kilometer from here.
Some women have gotten married here, but they say they wouldn't have if they had known about the water crisis.
There was a hand pump outside my home in my maternal village. But now I have to drink this dirt. If I knew how bad things were, I wouldn't have agreed to the marriage.
Now the Indian government plans to bring water from nearby rivers to these villages. But similar schemes haven't worked in the past. How will this time be any different? The engineer struggles to explain.
We have assessed that if we take a certain amount of water, it will not lead to scarcity. If there wasn't enough water in Yamuna River, the scheme wouldn't have been sanctioned.
Meanwhile, this is the kind of water some villages are left with. Buffaloes bathe here, and some women too. There aren't many choices.
The mind boggles at this next story. A computer engineer has come up with a plan to excavate a council tip in South Wales 9 years after he accidentally threw out a hard drive containing cryptocurrency that he believes is now worth more than $290 million. James Howells says if he finds it buried in the landfill in Newport, he'll give everyone in the city $100 worth of Bitcoin. The BBC's Mark Hutchings reports.
It's a needle in a haystack with a cryptocurrency twist. But James Howells is a man with a mission. In 2013, he made a costly error. He planned to throw away a blank hard drive. Instead, into the tip went nearly 8,000 bitcoins. Since then, he's been desperate to rummage through the rubbish. Now he's come up with an £11 million plan to excavate the site he believes contains his fortune. It would involve digging through thousands of tons of compacted landfill. But he says he's got an expert team on board. And if successful, he's pledging 10% of the proceeds to fund crypto-based projects and to hand out to each person in Newport. One snag, Newport Council won't let him. They say there would be a huge environmental impact in looking for a hard drive that might not be recoverable, assuming it's there at all.
You'd cry, wouldn't you? You'd just weep. And with Bitcoin's value fluctuating wildly in value, James Howells' possible payout has already dropped by more than $110 million. It's just inconceivable. Since the peak in January last year, when his haul would have been worth more than $406 million. Well, that is about all we've got time for. Don't forget the late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. And if you missed anything from the program, you can always find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, first up is going to speak to a long-time swim coach, Mark Bone, about funding for the sport in light of our Commonwealth Games medal rush. Do tune in for that one, 5 a.m. tomorrow. Have a great evening. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The Corrections Department says youth inmates in a rooftop standoff at Hawke's Bay Regional Prison just wanted to use the sports facilities. A Taliban spokesperson has condemned the US drone strike that killed an Al-Qaeda leader at the weekend, calling it a violation of international principles. A leading Māori GP says addressing poverty in lower socioeconomic areas would help ease stress at her clinic. And a bill that lowers the disclosure threshold for donations to political parties has passed its first reading at Parliament. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On Our Changing World this week, we learn about the Living Labs project. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei and AUT are collaborating to research the best methods for restoration of native forest.
We can make our restoration projects more successful if we know more about what leads to success and potentially speed up the results.
Follow Our Changing World on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or iHeart, or join me, Claire Kincannon, Thursdays and nights, just after the 9 o'clock news on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Claire, looking forward to that. And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on a Tuesday on RNZ National, which begins after the news at 7. My first guests are the geographers, Louise Richards and Gail Tipa. Gail is a specialist in Māori geography, and we'll be talking about what the concept of mātauranga Māori means when it comes to management of fresh water resources, which is a little bit of a hot topic these days, even if we're talking about water. In this half hour, later on, the latest on the inner workings into the House, or in the House, that being the House of Parliament. But first off, the detail, which has a look at the Commonwealth Games.
If you hit your head in a game of school rugby, the rules about concussion are clear right from the start.
Rugby is the first sport in New Zealand to have a mandatory stand down, which ensures, hopefully that the majority of concussions that do come back, they're fully recovered before they do with their 21, 23-day stand down.
That's only the beginning.
Their latest focus, supporting young athletes who suffer a head knock to return not to play, but to the classroom.
But what if you're playing underwater hockey or netball? They've also got rules, but they might not be the same rules. And who knows about these rules? The school, the team, the parents? It seems a no-brainer, sorry about the pun, that the rules should all be the same. I mean, we're talking about thousands of teens every year who get concussed. And the horror stories of the effects of a head knock in sport are coming at us thick and fast.
Steve's only 42 with 4 young kids, and he's already experiencing symptoms of dementia from repeated blows to the head playing rugby.
He was a first-round draft pick in 2003, and today Larry Johnson says there are 2 entire NFL seasons he simply doesn't remember.
I will never be the same person that I was before these things.
99% of the brains of former NFL players studied were damaged. All but one had CTE, the disease caused by repeated blows to the head.
But when it comes to laws on concussion, or even standard protocols covering every sport, New Zealand lags behind other countries.
The province of Ontario passed legislation this year aimed at protecting youth in amateur sport from head injuries, such as the one suffered by Rowan Stringer, the 17-year-old Ottawa rugby player for whom the bill, Rowan's Law, is named.
To set the stage for proving and acting on the notion that we care for our children, that they'll be able to trust that the coaches and the parents and the other athletes will help them get out of the game so they can heal and come back and still play sports for their whole life and have a great life.
I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. Today on The Detail, rugby leads the pack on concussion statistics, so no surprise that it leads the way with the protocols around head knocks. We'll meet New Zealand Rugby's Dr Danielle Salmon, whose research feeds into the way the game is played. But let's kick off with NZ Rugby's head of community rugby, Steve Lancaster. He's part of the new push to get national concussion laws for all sports, starting with secondary students.
I do find this area around legislation really interesting. You know, you look at what they've done in the States and in Canada, and it's across all sports, right? It's not around any individual sport. You know, I think we could learn from that.
I'm surprised that we haven't got something like that here.
Yeah, and we've gently started a conversation about whether, in fact, we should have something here. You know, and we would welcome that conversation at a national level, both with the government, with health agencies, and with other sports.
Why do you think it's so important?
Well, we've got to look after our young people, well, our people in general, but in particular our young people. And as you know, with young people, they don't always make good decisions. There's a culture of bravado amongst New Zealanders, right? So again, this isn't about any one sport, frankly, but attitudes to concussion, to head injury, you know, people tend to not want to disclose it or shrug it off, or they're impatient to get back to sport, or they want to get back to school and to learning, and they just don't understand actually the longer term or medium term effects that a head injury or a head knock can have. So, yeah, what they've done in the States and in Canada is they've put some structure around that with the legislation, and we've just released the return to study or return to learn guidelines for rugby, which essentially mirrors the type of programs that they have over there. We will implement that for rugby, but again, we think that there's no reason why that couldn't be implemented across codes, and we're not precious about the IP. We're happy to share it, and we're happy to take other sports along with us.
So it's called Return to Learn.